And I remember so clearly, like walking out of the factory, like just collapsing on the floor and calling my mom and being like, I can't do this anymore, I'm done. Customization at scale is a moat that's very difficult to replicate.
Customization at scale is Bombay Shirt Company.
Correct. There's times when I questioned it, frankly.
Yeah.
Investors didn't believe. Like you said, it was a problem for me because nothing off the rack fits me.
If someone walks into the Bombay Shirt Company today, they can get their hair cut for free. They can get a gelato.
Yeah.
And you're not charging for any of this. They don't have to purchase anything for this.
I also think that experiences is a trend as well. That people are willing to pay for that experience. I couldn't think of a better way to spend my Saturday morning.
What about pricing? Tell me on average how much custom-made shirt is going to cost me. How do you arrive at that pricing?
You're getting a custom-made product at the same price as a ready-made product with all the benefits of customization. Then why would you buy a ready-made product again?
Let's talk about the Indian apparel market today. Is there room for all of the players, or will only it be survival of the fittest?
Apparel as an industry has very low barriers to entry. Like I said, it took me 7 lakhs to get off the ground. In today's day and age, it'll probably take you less.
So there was a problem that you identified, that you weren't getting shirts off the rack to fit you.
The idea came to me one evening, decided to start literally the next morning. 7, 8, 10 years where delivering on time was our biggest challenge. We've lost customers over the years who just didn't want to wait.
What made you stick it out and say, I'm not going to shut shop completely?
There came many inflection points where there was a decision on whether we should keep doing this. There was a point, almost 2 years, where we were zero revenue for many months in those 2 years. For us, life and death moment. It's probably the closest we came to death, I would say. We were very lucky.
My guest today is Akshay Narvekar, founder of the Bombay Shirt Company and one of the early entrepreneurs who saw the opportunity to build personalized fashion in India. Back in 2012, when India's e-commerce ecosystem was still nascent, he put custom-made shirts on the internet. It was a contrarian bet at the time, when even buying clothes online felt uncertain. Investors questioned it, many dismissed it, and what followed was a series of hard decisions and pivots that led to building a brand that today does over 150 crores in revenue and operates 35 stores across 11 cities. In this episode of Wealth by Motilal Oswal, we go beyond the milestones and into the real mechanics of building in fashion and retail. From creating a no-inventory made-to-order supply chain to scaling customization, navigating competition in a $70 billion market, and understanding what it takes to build a brand that actually lasts. Walk into a flagship store and treat yourself to a gelato, a coffee, and a grooming service while you decide what's best for your wardrobe. You can catch the episode on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Sasha, let's start off at the beginning. Thank you so much for being with us today. So there was a problem that you identified, that you weren't getting shirts off the rack to fit you. And this was a problem that you wanted to solve. And within 6 months, you launched a website. Pros and cons. What was the pro of doing this? What was the bad part about it?
So first off, thanks for having me on your show. So if I dial back, I was 29 years old, was raring to go and do something on my own. Like you said, it was a problem for me because nothing off the rack fits me. So I had to go and do the whole process of buying fabric and taking it to the tailor shop, which wasn't the most optimal consumer experience. The idea came to me one evening, decided to start literally the next morning. And I'm generally quite impatient by nature. If you ask my team, they'll tell you that. And the barriers to entry are low. All I needed was a website, maybe some fabric rolls, a couple of tailors, a little room to get started, which is what we did. And the pros, I guess, is that we got started, and we could have deliberated on this for ages and come up with the perfect plan, but we didn't. We just got going pretty quickly. Everyone who collaborated with us on the project, whether it was the branding or the packaging or fabrics, were all friends of mine from the ecosystem. So that was great. So it was easy to get off the ground. But in retrospect, and I'm quite open about this, maybe it was too soon from a product perspective. So while we got a lot of traction from a brand, perspective, given that we were kind of first to market with the concept, I don't think we were ready from a product perspective at all. Shirt making is a serious art, I would say, and it takes a lot of R&D, a lot of product knowledge to get it right. people take their clothes very seriously, I've realized. And it took me a long time post-launching to really figure out what it takes to make good clothes. I'm sure we'll dive deeper into that, but that was the con. So it took a lot of undoing.
That's correct. But I guess at least you got the ball rolling. You started somewhere because, like you said, otherwise everyone's waiting for the perfect moment. And sometimes that doesn't end up coming. And you have to just start somewhere and then maybe pivot. Okay. So before this, you spent 5 years at BCBG, if I understand, and that was global. What did that experience teach you? How do they operate over there? How is it different? What were the learnings that you took away?
Yeah. So BCBG was my first job out of college in the US. I finished college, drove down to LA, which is, I guess, every 21-year-old's dream. Had no experience in fashion, had an interest, and joined BCBG. I spent 5 years, like you said, more on the business and operations side, not less on the design side. Obviously, I had no design experience. But as a young guy in a fashion company on the business side, I was one of the few people actually doing that. I got to travel the world. We bought a bunch of companies. When I say we, I mean BCBG bought a bunch of companies in Europe. So I got to travel, help integrate those companies. So I really understood what it took to run a fashion company at scale. And I think even from a lifestyle perspective, living in LA as a early 20 to 25-year-old, it's a great time.
So any learnings from there that you still use or you took away from there?
Yeah, I think the process mentality when you're running a company of that size, and at the time it was $1 billion company, so very large. Everything has to be processized, systemized. In fact, that was my job, was to actually go into every department across the company, understand how people were doing their jobs, documenting it, seeing where efficiencies could be had. When we acquired companies, it was sort of taking those processes, applying it to those companies. And so all of that helped me when it came time to start my own company because I knew how the back end of an apparel business worked.
Okay, that's interesting about the overall process-oriented part of it. And then you come back here, 7 lakh rupees, a silent partner, a website. What were the toughest or the hardest parts when you started off Bombay Shirt Company?
Yes, I think getting started was not difficult. Like you said,
Okay.
7 lakhs, capital that a friend of mine and I put together wasn't the hard bit. I think is actually once we started getting traction and people actually started paying money for the products that we were selling, things became real. And like I said, I don't think we were there from a product perspective. And so then dealing with the aftermath of that became very difficult. My partner was not actually working in the business. So it was kind of me alone for the first 4 or 5 years almost. It was difficult. There was ups and downs. There was times that I wanted to quit. There came many inflection points where there was a decision on whether we should keep doing this or whether it just makes sense to fold it up and do something else. I can get into all the details, but it was a challenge every single day. And I think that's not unique to our business. I'm sure most entrepreneurs who start their own businesses will go through that in the early years, and the ones that make it are the ones who just see it through.
I think resilience, because that is something that a lot of entrepreneurs really talk about, and I'll delve into that a little bit later. But you said you had no fashion background, and then yet you taught yourself fittings, patterns, cuts. What is it that other people within the retail space get wrong when they don't really look at detail orientation when it comes to fittings, etc., that you think is a big mistake?
So I think in any business, apparel or otherwise, I think the product is key. Everything else is table stakes, right? The experience, etc., is not. I mean, it makes no difference if the product is not what it needs to be. I think that's, again, like I said, where I got it wrong. So it took me years of literally days of sleeping in the factory, spending all day with my master tailors, understanding the nuances of what it takes to make a good shirt, and getting into all the details, being at the store, watching those shirts get fitted on customers, understanding what they liked and didn't like. It took a long, long time. And I think, again, applicable to any industry. If you don't know your product as a founder, I don't think that's something you can hire for. I think that needs to reside with you. Even if that's not your prior experience, educate yourself. Once you understand the product that you are selling, everything else will come naturally and you can hire for the rest of it.
Now, that's really interesting that you spoke about knowing the product yourself. And like you said, you spent those sleepless nights really learning it. And that's interesting. You didn't study it, but you learned everything. You educated yourself on your own. Do you think that now, for people getting into the industry, that the skill set that you acquire, say, on the job or whilst learning, is more valuable or holds more value than actually the degree or studying?
Oh, 100%. So you and I have kids the same age. They're very young still, but I am very clear that the 4-year degree when they're 18 years old is not going to be a thing anymore. I think vocational training, I think very specific training on what they're interested in is really what education is going to be. What the duration of education might be, whether it's a year or 2 or 3, I don't know. But I think a lot more is learned on the job and in the practical sense than through books and theory. So like while I said, I took my education very seriously. If I have to look back, what I really learned was stuff that I did on the job and practically on a day-to-day basis.
It's interesting because I had the same experience as well. I learned everything on the job. And I think that was my biggest teacher. So yes, you have that obsession with fabric, with detail, etc. You learned on the factory floor. So you definitely think that that gave you a bit of an edge from maybe the other players, because you were in a competitive and a crowded, a very well-established space.
Absolutely. I mean, you're going up against incumbents who are very, very large. I'm sure the CEOs of their companies are not sitting on the shop floor or talking to customers on a day-to-day basis. Remember, we had a store and I was one of the salesmen for the first 1 year. So being there, understanding what customers are asking for and what they like and dislike was a real advantage for us. And ultimately, people are choosing with their wallets basis the product that you're selling them, right? And if it's a product that they like, where so much care has gone into it, ultimately you're going to win that customer over the incumbents. So I think that was at some point that became the strength.
So you started off with the no inventory made to order model, and that's a bit counterintuitive when it comes to the entire retail space. So what were the trade-offs? What did you do wrong? How did it work? And what didn't work for you?
Yeah, good question. I think it started off as necessity. We had no money for inventory or making products and stocking it. And Made to Measure lends itself to having no inventory. So it was great. We started with negative working capital because we had terms with suppliers where you pay them 60 days out, you collect money up front from the customer, and then you have a negative working capital cycle. And so that was great. We could scale for the first almost 10 years that way. Over time, with obviously fast fashion, with quick commerce, and people just generally being impatient and wanting things quicker, we've gotten into ready to wear, right? So it's still a smaller part of the business. We're known for made to measure. And the balance of the two allows us to keep working capital at a very manageable level. But yeah, in the early days when capital was scarce, doing it without any inventory was just really helpful for us. There was the sort of ulterior benefit of the sustainability angle, right? Because you're not wasting anything. There's no inventory being marked down or burnt or put in landfills. And in the apparel industry, that's a big problem.
Yes.
So there was none of that. That was the ulterior benefit, like I said, of this model. So it worked for us. And it took a lot of work on the supply chain side to actually be able to cater to every piece one at a time, make it every time it's ordered in a definitive time frame. But those were all the learnings and everything that we had to figure out along the way.
So this, when you have to scale customization, that can be pretty contradictory in a way. So how did it work? Tell me more about the supply chain and what were the challenges?
Yeah, again, nobody believed that it was possible. There's times when I questioned it, frankly. Investors didn't believe. Nobody really thought, because like you said, it's counterintuitive. It took many years. And there are, even till today, building blocks of the business that had needed to be invested in early on for us to be able to do what we do today. The two biggest ones are supply chain. Like I said, setting up a process for how every piece can be made one at a time, again, within a definitive time frame. People expect their clothes in 7 to 10 days at the very latest. And then to do that with a certain level of consistency, etc., took a lot of trial and error. I mean, we had, again, 7, 8, 10 years where delivering on time was our biggest challenge. We've lost customers over the years who just didn't want to wait and had a bad experience for having to wait too long for their product.
Really?
Because it's just very, very difficult to do it at scale. Today, we're at a point where that is just autopilot. We've got a process and system that works almost with very little manual touch. It's all systemized, which kind of brings me to the second big building block for the business, which is technology.
Yes.
Everything from connecting someone who places an order at the store or the website, their preferences, their measurements, then connected back to procurement and then manufacturing and logistics, and then the after sales. Remember, there could be alterations in a made-to-measure business. and how that plays back in. So building that entire module took years and years and years, without which I don't think anybody could do this at scale. So supply chain, technology, big building blocks. From that, everything on the front end becomes really easy.
Okay. And you've gone on to say that I think offline contributes about 70% of your total revenue. Online is about 30%. But today, here we are sitting in the heart of South Mumbai in one of your stores, roughly 2,500 square feet, 2,200 square feet. That involves quite a bit of CapEx. At what point do you break even when you open a store? Is it 3 to 6 months? Is it longer than that? And isn't that too CapEx heavy on a business like yours?
Again, pros and cons of doing it that way. Typically, and it depends on the size of the store, operationally, we break even in the first couple of months. Many stores, if they're smaller especially, break even in month one. Larger stores like this, it might take 2 or 3 months, though I think this one broke even in the first month as well. From a payback on the CapEx, that's a little bit longer. So in our case, it takes roughly 9 to 12 months, again, dependent on size. The larger the store, slightly longer to break even. But at the very sort of outset, it's about 12 to 14 months at the very latest. On average, is about 9 to 10 months.
And what's your customer acquisition cost when it's online versus offline?
So we look at it as a blended cost because we've got a strong correlation between someone who sees an ad or a social media post digitally and then comes to the store. In fact, we see customers walking with their phones, having wishlisted or shortlisted stuff on the app and bringing it here. So we kind of look at it as a combined number. And we don't do too much specific like store level marketing. And it's very much a brand halo, some product related marketing. And then whether the customer converts offline, online, to us, it doesn't really matter. We need to be present everywhere. As a product that's ubiquitous, right? Everyone buys shirts. We have to be present everywhere. And as customers choose to shop, we're happy to service them.
What kind of margins do you enjoy and what's the revenue that you're operating at right now?
So on the revenue front, this year we'll do roughly 200 crores the coming year. Mm-hmm. In terms of margins, it's anywhere between 58 to 60% net margin, accounting for obviously discounts and all of that.
Okay. And now franchising, that's something that you're looking at in order to scale going forward. Why does that work for you? What does the partner need to get right?
So that was a trade-off we were talking about, right? Either you put in the CapEx yourself, which for a store like this can be fairly heavy, or you can franchise it out. The pros are that if you're franchising it out, the CapEx is not on your books. Even when we do franchise, the service is all run by us. Okay. So it's purely a financial investment from the franchisee's perspective. They put in the CapEx. We do everything from sourcing the location to the design and the fit outs, and we run the store. It's a service-oriented business. We don't want that to be given out to a franchisee because we want to tightly control that. And so the benefits, like I said, are obvious. It's a financing mechanism for us. Okay. The flip side of that is on the P&L, there's a hit of, depending on each store, but anywhere from 8 to 10% of the revenue going to the franchisee, which affects ultimately your revenue and eventually your valuation. So it's really a P&L versus a balance sheet trade-off that we need to make, which is a fine balance. So, we take a call every time we find a location on whether it makes sense to, franchise it out or run it off our books and take on the CapEx.
Okay, fair enough. You want it to remain that very service-oriented business.
That is non-negotiable.
So it's just a pure financial partner for the franchise model. So currently, I understand there's 35 retail stores in India, but there were 2 globally in New York and Dubai that eventually shut down. Yeah. Did that sort of, make you go 2 steps forward, 3 steps back with the global expansion? Did that deter you? And what's the game plan for store expansion?
Yeah, so international was always one of my ambitions when I started the company. I wanted to build a brand that could be relevant, not just here, but across the globe. In 2015, we started both our New York and our Dubai stores, and they ran quite successfully until 2020. And when COVID hit, given the rentals in both those cities, it just became unsustainable with the lockdowns, and we had to give up both the spaces. That being said, we mentioned off camera that we're looking to get back into Dubai very soon in the coming quarter, as well as London. Hopefully, like I said, over the next 3 to 4 months, we should have presence in both those cities, and then we'll kick off from there.
Okay. And 35 retail stores in India currently. How do you plan to expand that further?
So those 35 stores are across 10 or 11 cities currently, and I think we firmly believe that density matters. So we take it city at a time. If I look back, actually, that's one of the things I would have done differently. Rather than initially expand and try and cover the geography across the country, I would have gone city by city and really, densified the city, because there's a lot of pros from doing that. Whether it's operationally just having better control, whether it's marketing dollars going further, and the brand halo expanding across the same city. There's just a lot of reasons to do it that way. I was just keen to get our name out there, as any young entrepreneur would want to do. But now we're kind of dialing that back and trying to densify each city before moving on to the next, even though the cities may have been operational for us for a long time. So, for example, Bombay now has, I think, 10 or 11 stores. Delhi, we've gone up to 9 stores just in the last 1 year. Hyderabad has gone to 4 or 5 stores. And like that, we'll keep taking one city at a time, making sure we have enough of a presence before we move on to the next.
So what are the year-end targets? Do you have any?
So actually, it's a mix today of opening new stores, but also taking locations that work currently, but maybe undersized for the demographic. For example, Kemp's Corner. We had a smallish store on the first floor, not too far from here, but that didn't do justice to the demographic that we're servicing in the area.
Okay.
So then taking on a larger store, putting in the capex for this, better location, we'll do that in multiple current locations.
Okay.
Because the customer already exists there. We're just, feeding off of that, versus opening a brand new location where we don't know exactly what's going to happen.
You mentioned COVID, and that within the retail space was a big blow to everyone, especially those who had a big offline presence.
Yeah.
What made you stick it out and say, I'm not going to shut shop completely, or I can't sustain? And what would be the learnings from that? Event.
Yeah,
like
for
that.
us, life and death moment, it's probably the closest we came to death, I would say. We were very lucky. 2019 December is when we raised our Series A from Lightbox. And that money came in really handy, because 2 months later we went into lockdown. For a business like ours at the time, we were zero inventory, which means that we couldn't sell anything because we couldn't make anything. We couldn't access the factories. We're also, as you know, a heavily offline dependent company, and customers couldn't come to our store. So, there was a point, almost 2 years, where we were zero revenue for many months in those 2 years. Luckily, the funding that we had just raised kept us going. But then coming out of COVID, once you've run through the funding, getting new funding was even more difficult, right? Because who wants to fund a company that was zero revenue for so many months in the year? We were lucky then that one of our existing backers, Singularity, who's still a very large backer of this company, we just closed around last week actually, came in, had the faith, capitalized us, and we were able to take off from there. But yeah, there was a period between 2021 and 23 where this could have gone anyway.
I really hope you're enjoying this episode. Do remember, take a moment to hit the subscribe button on your screen. You said luckily and investors multiple times. You were zero revenue, and then somebody had the faith, they backed you.
Yep.
Singularity, Lightbox at the time.
Yep.
But taking on capital is not always the best way to go. What made you think that it was the best for your company? And when do you think that you need to take on external capital or just stay bootstrapped?
So I launched this company in 2012. Didn't need a whole lot of capital to get started. But then over time, as we scaled, I needed small bits of capital. So I never went out and raised a large round. It was always incremental amounts of capital to get to the next phase. And that capital could mean starting a larger factory or opening the next store or the next city. And we kept raising it in increments every 18 months from 2012 until 2019. 2019, Sandeep from Lightbox, a friend of mine as well, started talking about the business. And there was just a meeting of the minds there. I had a very important decision to make. I could have either continued on the path of raising incremental capital, holding a large percentage of the company, eventually selling it, and being a majority owner when we sold it, or saying, let's take on external capital and try and really make this a household name. I deliberated on that for a while, decided that Lightbox and working with Sandeep and team was the way forward, because I had bigger ambitions for what this can be. And then we raised that Series A round in December 2019. Once you're on that hamster wheel, there's no getting off it. You have to take the company to a certain size for it to make sense for everyone financially. And that is a conscious decision that every entrepreneur needs to make. If I look back, would I do it again? Yes and no. I mean, it really comes down to ambition. If you really think that what you're building can be something massive and outsized, then yes, taking on capital is the right thing for you. But there are many people who are happy with building something of a decent scale, but then controlling a larger pie, that might be the way to go. So it's really very much a personal question for a lot of people.
Okay.
And for me at the time, my ambitions were larger.
So you're saying if you have the larger ambitions, if you want to scale, if you want to grow quicker, you need that external capital. But then you're answerable. You need to deliver those targets. You need to deliver those numbers. Need to make prudent financial sense for the investor.
It's non-negotiable. Once you've put pen to paper, it's non-negotiable. Everyone's expectations, from your investors to your own to the team that you hire, people are joining you by buying into a vision, a very large vision that you have, and you let them down as well, right? So there's an extra pressure that comes with this. When you're running your own business with your own capital, I'm not saying there's no pressure, but it's an intrinsic pressure. Versus when you take on that capital, your stakeholders are your customers, your investors, your team, and then finally yourself. So a lot of people to manage.
Okay. Let's talk about the Indian apparel market today. Very crowded right now. Where do you think there is still meaningful opportunity? Is there room for all of the players, or will only it be survival of the fittest?
So apparel as an industry has very low barriers to entry. Like I said, it took me 7 lakhs to get off the ground. In today's day and age, it'll probably take you less with all the tools that are available at your disposal. I think it's very hard today, and I hope I'm wrong. It's very hard today to build a brand that is massive with outsized recognition, given the number of brands out there. You really have to be doing something very different or very special. People, for most products, people are not very sticky. They want choice. They want variety in terms of brands, in terms of looks, in terms of products. So for one company to come in there and get a outsized market share, very difficult. I hope I'm wrong, like I said. But if I had started this business today versus back in 2012, the chances of success, I think, would have been a lot lower today than they were when I started.
Okay, fair enough. So I guess you have to have that USP, something different, something special if you really want to stand out.
Which cannot be copied, right? Because ultimately most things can be copied. So even if it's a USP on day one, what's that moat that's going to keep you going? Now, in our case, I hope that customization at scale is a moat that's very difficult to replicate.
Okay.
Right? So every brand needs to find their own.
Customization at scale is Bombay Shirt Company's moat. Okay. What about pricing? Tell me on average how much a custom-made shirt is going to cost me, a custom-made pair of pants, and how do you arrive at that pricing?
So when I started the brand, the vision was very clear. I wanted this to be a democratic brand where custom bespoke had this very snooty connotation. I didn't want that to be the case. I wanted to be something that was affordable at the same price point that you're getting your ready-made clothes at, right? So if you're getting a ready-made product, you're getting a custom-made product at the same price as a ready-made product with all the benefits of customization, then why would you buy a ready-made product again? So that's kind of how it started. Back when we started, for a shirt, that number was in the 2,000 to 2,500 rupee range. Kind of the flywheel of what happened there is when you put out the product and then customers' expectations go higher, which means that the raw material and the sourcing and everything that goes into manufacturing the product needs to be upgraded. That comes at a cost, which means then the price goes up. And so that's sort of a self-perpetuating thing where today now our made-to-measure shirts, while they start at about 3,000 rupees, I think the average is about 4,500 rupees. And for a ready-to-wear garment, that's about 2,000 rupees to 2,500 rupees. So it's a little bit more on the affordable side. For trousers, similarly, it's about 3,500 to 4,000 rupees. So we're still trying to peg it to what our ready-to-wear sort of competitors / incumbents.
But it still commands that slight premium.
It is definitely not on the mass scale, right? It's rich to luxury.
So when you say this luxury, the fact that you've gone down this very niche route, I mean, let's be honest, what kind of a demographic are you really catering to? A very minuscule one, especially in India. Would you agree? Do you think that maybe having gone down the mass route and, mass production, maybe lowering the price point would have been more optimal?
I think it comes down to you as a person, right? So the product I enjoy, the product I wear, the product that makes me proud is a product that ultimately sells at the price that it sells at. So I didn't start backwards saying that here's the price point I want to play at, and so I need to do X, Y, Z to get there. It's here's the product that makes me happy and makes me proud, and so it's going to cost what it does. Now,
you were clear with that.
I was very clear. Again, I have to be a consumer of my product. Remember, I was a consumer of my product. That's why I started this business. That being said, 10 years ago, I would buy the argument that the demographic for this product is small, particularly in India. I think that's changing. I think that's changing very fast. There's so much more disposable income. People are so much more willing to spend on discretionary stuff like clothes. and that's just a macro trend, and hopefully that just
Premiumization.
absolutely. And I think we fit very squarely in the middle of that whole
Okay.
premiumization movement. So.
Okay, that's interesting that you need to be a consumer of your product. You were very focused that this is the path you
Again,
wanted
that's
to.
for me. There's a lot of founders who run products that they're not consumers of,
and
but
they
for
wanna
me
make-
that was very clear.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe. Okay. Fair enough. So let's talk about someone who is, say, 25, 30 years old. They want to start something within the fashion space. What do they begin with? What's your best advice?
Comes back to the same thing, right? What defines you? Because ultimately you start a business, whether it's fashion or otherwise, there's going to be ups and downs, and you're going to keep going because you love the product, right? So what's that product that A, is very much you, B, that you know more about than anybody else out there, where you've spent tons of hours researching, sampling, just being interested in. Now, hopefully that's unique enough for you to scale that into a business. Time will tell. Again, just get started, because if you don't, you'll never know. But it comes back to the same thing. What's that insight in terms of the product or the consumer that you have that nobody else has?
Yeah. And I think passion as well. Like I know you spoke about it, but honing in on what you're passionate about, because this is going to be your day and night. This is how you're going to spend your hours. So you need to really be passionate, right?
Again, that's why it comes back to me saying I only want to work on a business or a product that I care about, because when things get tough, if you don't really care about what you're working on, it's very easy to say, just to give up or say no. But when you really love what you're doing, you're going to keep at it, because the bad times are going to come.
Yeah.
That's inevitable. So be prepared for that.
Tell me more about the bad times. I mean, was there things like customer dissatisfaction, maybe an incident or a story that you'd like to share with us, or maybe COVID?
So many. Like I said, we didn't have the best product in the first couple of years.
Okay.
I finally felt like we had fixed that and got over the hump. That's when we opened our first store in Kalagoda. I spent the mornings, and evenings selling to customers. There were lines outside the doors on weekends. I would then take the product, the orders each evening to the factory and spend the night at the factory, caffeinating my tailors and working on the product and taking it back the next day. And this was working really well. And I finally felt like all that effort had paid off. And then one fine day, our interlining, which is what goes into the collar, supplier provided us a bad batch of interlining. And we found that every collar was bubbling on wash. And we had just made 300 shirts or something like that over like 2 or 3 nights, like really slogged it out. And then we tested each one of those shirts and they were bubbling. And I remember so clearly, like walking out of the factory, like just collapsing on the floor and calling my mom and being like, I can't do this anymore, I'm done. And she was like, just take a deep breath, and it's 300 shirts. It'll take another 3 days, make them again and let's go. And I remember that vividly as being one of the moments where I was like, I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And there've been others, and I've selectively blocked them out of my memory. But that one definitely, is something I won't forget. But yeah, those days are going to come. I'm sure there'll be days like that in the future. We just have to be prepared for them.
Yeah. So it's nice that you had that helping hand and someone to pick you up. How important is it to have maybe a mentor or someone? I spoke with said, you need to have someone who's a no bullshit filter in your life when you're running a business. How important is that?
Very, very. I think I've not done the greatest job in terms of finding mentors consistently over the years. I kind of just did things my own way, but I did have family. That's like you said, no bullshit, right? Tell me like it is. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. You've chosen this life, now stick it out. So whether it's my parents, whether it's my wife, all of them. And so that's something I definitely appreciate. And if you don't have that support, very hard to build a business, right? So I think I can speak for myself, but come from a privileged enough background where, the only issue in my life was the work I'm doing and trying to do a good job of that. Everything else is fairly stable, touch wood. And it allowed me to do my best work. So that's very helpful.
Okay. I can't believe I didn't talk about this earlier. The kind of customer experience that you have, and you stressed a lot upon it. If someone walks into the Bombay Shirt Company today, they can get their hair cut for free. They can get a gelato, and you're not charging for any of this. They don't have to purchase anything for this. How important is customer experience?
Very. We're, as I said, very much an offline company at the moment, and will continue to be that way. Ultimately, why do customers walk into a store when they can buy everything online? Even with us, right? It's about the experience. And I come back to asking myself, if I was looking for an outlet where I have 2 or 3 hours on a Saturday morning to spend, how would I like to spend it, right? And we've designed the experience around that. So coming in here, obviously looking at clothes. I love clothes, getting something tailored, maybe having a coffee upstairs, then getting a haircut and a shave, a little bit of indulgence, and then finishing off with an ice cream. I couldn't think of a better way to spend my Saturday morning. And so we designed it that way. Yeah, like you said, yeah, the haircuts and the ice cream is free for the moment. And that was just an additional perk for customers, just to show them we care.
Amazing. So you've really focused on the customer experience. But then the flip side is someone saying, why can't I just buy this online? I don't have the time. I mean, today we're looking at quick commerce. We want things within the next 10 minutes. So isn't that a bit counterintuitive to what we're seeing as a trend?
I also think that experiences is a trend as well, right? People are willing to pay for that experience, especially for a man. You know, the urban Indian male, what are their outlets? Like very few. There's sport, obviously, and health and wellness. And I'd say this is the other side of it. And we wanted to be at the forefront of that and saying if there is a retail shopping experience for a man, how could we make it as fun as possible? And we'll take feedback and see what else customers would want. There are a few suggestions that have come in.
Yeah.
And we'll see. We'll keep iterating on it.
Okay, that's true. Experiences are really huge in areas like retail, travel, dining, etc.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about marketing and branding because that's a big part of the puzzle. And you drove early growth without heavy marketing initially. So, what really worked for you, and what's the advice?
I can spend a lot of time on this. I'm not a big fan of paid marketing. Of course, we do it. But that can't be the be all and end all. I think people connect to brands because of emotion, because of storytelling. And I try to keep that the main thing when it comes to marketing. So I'm still very involved on that front. I also believe that, and you're probably sick of hearing this, but the product should speak for itself. And marketing is just the cherry on top. So if you can combine a good product and experience at the store level, with great storytelling, emotional storytelling, educational storytelling, right? People who want to understand more about their clothes and why, what works and what doesn't work and the provenance behind the product. These are all things that matter. Now, can you grow a business at scale, investor-backed, investor-led without performance marketing? I don't think that's really feasible. So, but you have to find the right balance between that. And again, it's more an art than a science, and you have to keep iterating on that. But I'm squarely in the camp of brand marketing as opposed to performance marketing.
So on average, what are the marketing spends and how does that compare maybe to a larger conglomerate or someone who's spending heavily on branding?
I think on one end, you'll have a D2C startup that spends heavily. A huge proportion of their P&L goes into marketing. On the other hand, you'll have the incumbents who probably spend not more than 3 to 5%. We're somewhere in the middle. So at the moment, we're squarely at about 8% of net revenue spent on marketing. We're quite particular about that. So we're not going to try and inflate online sales by just throwing money behind marketing. It's more an outcome based on a set budget that we have each month.
I want to talk about technology because you spoke about that. The fact that you can customize but do that at scale. That's your moat.
Yep.
But in a business that's so creative, do you feel that there is that balance that you need to hold between craftsmanship, creativity, and yet technology that fuels it all?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a business that's very sort of left brain and right brain. And as a founder, you need to kind of, make sure that you're using both sides. I think without technology, that's the base layer. Technology and supply chain, as I mentioned, is the base layer. We spent years just getting that right before we could even start thinking about being creative. Because today, I can be as creative and dream as much as I want, but if I don't have the infrastructure to support the creativity, it's never going to see the light of day. Or it will, and the customer will not have a great experience. And so I think that's also the interesting part of this job, is that you get to flex both muscles, being creative, but at the same time, thinking through business problems. But yeah, it's a challenge.
I've spoken with a lot of entrepreneurs and founders, and they said that you know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes when you don't know something, it's best to hire the best minds or the minds that do know how to do it and give up or relinquish control.
Yep.
How important do you think that is? Tell us your experience.
Very. In retrospect, that if I had to go back all these years, that is the one thing I would spend a lot more time on than I actually did. I have a great team
or what?
in terms of, looking for the right people for every role.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong. Like I said, I'm very happy with the team that we have, and I'm very proud to work with them. But I think most founders need to spend no less than 30% of their time just meeting people and potential hires, and not for any specific role. Just in general, you never know what's going to pop up at every scale of your business, and every time you're at the next phase of your business. And those networks and interviews will come in handy. I should have done more of that back in the day. Because you're only going to go as far as the people around you at some point, right? Yeah, you may have the passion and the vision, but there's people who need to actually get the job done, and it comes down to those folks really. That will determine, success or failure.
So what's in store for the Bombay Shirt Company? What's the vision? I believe that there's an IPO on the anvil. You're looking at 1,000 crore rupee revenue. What are the targets for that? When can we see that coming into fruition?
Well, so we're taking it one step at a time. We've just raised a round of funding, as I mentioned to you, and closed it just last week. So we've got a roadmap over the next 3 years. We want to be at anywhere between 75 to 100 stores in India, and then we'll see how the international expansion goes, simultaneously. And then we look at exits post that. But for the next 3 years or so, I think it's tunnel vision. Just keep building, doing more of what we do, just trying to be creative. And then the outcome will be just a result of everything we put into it.
All right, that was really interesting, and I hope to manage to get an interview with you at the time that you do IPO. But before we let you go, a rapid fire: the most overrated metric in retail.
I'd say CAC, cost of acquisition, because you could have a low CAC acquiring customers that are deal hunters, are not going to be with you long term. I'd rather focus on LTV. So even though your
LTV, which is
long-term value of the customer. So I'd rather pay more to acquire the customer, but then have them for a very, very long time because it pays off.
Okay, so cost of acquisition.
Yeah.
One decision that changed your business trajectory for the better.
Going offline.
Okay. The fastest way to fail in fashion today?
Being a marketing-oriented company as opposed to a product-oriented one.
Okay. The one thing that customers say they care about, but they're not willing to pay for it?
Well, in my experience, membership programs.
Okay. What's harder, building the first store or scaling to 15 stores?
Maybe counterintuitively scaling to 15 because there's a lot of challenges that come up with that.
And I'm changing this up. What's the best advice that you received in your business?
Take a lot of advice from people, but just do you at the end of the day.
And that's exactly what you've done with the Bombay Shirt Company. It's a fantastic space and a fantastic brand that you've built. Thank you so much for being so honest with us.
Thanks for having me.
So many key takeaways from this very interesting interview, especially if you're looking to scale within the retail space. First up, product is king. So make sure that you know your product inside out. And of course, if you don't know enough about that industry, educate yourself. It's important to hire the right people because you only go as far as the people around you. When you're taking external capital, you're on that hamster wheel. You are answerable to people. So it's important to live up to those targets, especially if you're ambitious and you want to scale. If you want to make it within the apparel industry, you need to have that moat. You need to have something that really makes you stand out. Be differentiated, be special, and don't be something that can be copied because it does have a very low entry barrier. And of course, do make sure that your product speaks for itself. Marketing is only the cherry on top. And it's important to have a mix between creativity, customization, and of course, technology that will fuel your business going forward. I really hope you enjoyed this interview and more like these formats. Do remember to post your comments in the comments section below. And do remember, if you enjoyed this interview, take 1 second to hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.